If you'd like to turn your Bibles to Romans chapter 12, or excuse me, we're at chapter, let me see where I'm at, 1. Well, I said 12, I guess I'm thinking of a famous passage about being a living sacrifice here. Rolls out too quickly. We had our send-off prayer this morning for a lot of us that are headed to Nicaragua this Wednesday. Appreciate you continuing to remember us. We'll not see you this Wednesday unless something goes different than what we planned for. Unless you happen to get on a plane and go south, or our plane doesn't go. I see Jessica here tonight. She didn't make it this morning. Send a text out to everybody this afternoon with little reminders of things. And Jessica's going to go down by herself on the 6th. She's graduating before she goes, and so she decided she'd hang around and do that good thing, and then after walking across the stage, she's going to fly down there by herself. I promised her that I would be standing on the other side of that glass waving at her as she came through customs, so she'd have a friendly face that she knew who she was getting in the car with to go for an hour's ride down to Granada. You never know what you might end up with, so that might work out better for her, and she said that make her dad feel real good. And being a dad, I understand that. But keep us in your prayers. Tonight I want to talk about mission work in a perspective here, particularly from Paul. And I was thinking about this afternoon, and as I get through a series, a lot of times I look for maybe just a 1 or 2 shot lesson, as I call it, of what I might talk about before I start in a new series. And with our mission trip planned now for the 2 weeks being gone, back for 2 weeks and then gone another week in June, all to Nicaragua, and kids headed to Peru, as was mentioned, at the end of this month. All these people to pray about, but I think, well, let's just do some things that'll be just a good one-time thing to think about and encourage us. And you think, well, why are you talking to us about missions? Because we're supporters of missions and have been for a long time, long time. And I appreciate just how important that is. If you ever get the chance to go, and I know you're looking at me and saying, no, I'm not sure I'm going to get that. But what a difference it makes in you knowing what I'm talking about when I say how important it is. And anybody that's been there is nodding their head right now saying, I know what you're saying. But also there's the opposite, or not the opposite, but the other side of that is that it blesses the congregation, because the people that go, when they come back, you're changed inside. And we begin to view things a little differently. The things of the world don't have the same view as what they were before you left. And you begin to see a little bit more about what's going on in the rest of the world firsthand. And it reminds us of things. And so I think about that, and I was looking this afternoon at Paul's writings and thinking about why did he really go do mission work? Because you think about it, he was very passionate in his Jewish religion. Of course, changed hands and became, obviously, just as passionate the other direction. But he doesn't seem like he ever slowed down. I mean, he just hit the brick wall of that bright light, became a Christian, and turned right around, and like the most Super Bowl bouncing ball you could ever see, he was booming back the other direction, full force. And what a passionate person he did. And I look at Paul, and I think, what can I grab from him, for myself, and also share with other people that might help us to open our eyes just a bit about some of these things? Now, Paul had no assurance when he went on his mission trips that he was going to have a house to stay in where he went. And yet he went to so many different places. He just went because there was a need to go there. And when he got there, he had no idea what he was going to find. Well, occasionally he did have some ideas of what he was going to find, because occasionally the Spirit would tell him ahead of time. When you get to Jerusalem, for instance, you're going to find a heartache and problems, and you're going to be put into prison. Those are some things he was told about, and yet he went anyhow. But as far as the comforts that we look toward, calling on the phone or getting on the internet and making a reservation at a hotel, and here's where I'm going to stay, or I'm going to, like we've done this trip here, I'm going to coordinate, and we're going to stay in Christians' homes. And these young people don't know what these homes look like, but I do. And I know these people, and it's not very comfortable. And we're going to be staying, some of us just sleeping on the floor on some pads and stuff. And some might have a bed, and they might wish they had the floor, depending on what the bed looks like. I don't know. But we're going just the same to some places I've seen before and where you have comfort for. Paul never had that assurance. Never had assurance of an income or anything backing him. But he went anyway. Why did he go about doing all these things? And why did he deal with the other things that came along with his missionary journeys, like being stoned, or starving, or being shipwrecked? And so many other things that go along with what Paul talked about, especially in 2 Corinthians. And he talked in chapter 11 about the hardships that he went through on some of his journeys. And that weren't all of them, I'm sure. But there were enough to let you know that it was a tough thing for Paul to do. But here's what he says in Romans chapter 1. And I'm going to look at the very first thing he categorizes himself for, because this is his starting place. As he introduces the letter, he says, Paul, a bondservant. Bondservant, now he's talking about here. This is an individual that commits himself to be like a slave, although he doesn't have to be. But he's going to commit to that. It's not the slave that's been taken from one country as a prisoner and brought to another country and sold off the block. And he has no decision whatsoever. But this is the type of guy that works for somebody for a long time, and he likes working for him so well, he says, I want to belong to you. You take care of me, I work for you, and we've got such a relationship. This is valuable. Now you can find in Deuteronomy a little discussion about that, and there's another place. We'll look at chapter 15 here. And as you see here what Paul's talking about in Deuteronomy 15, he deals with, not Paul rather, but Moses, about a concept that I think that Paul relates to. Verses 16 to 18 of Deuteronomy 15. Talking about servants and bondservants, etc. It's a law concerning that. But here I'm going to jump in the middle and says, now if it happens that he says to you, that is the bondservant now says to you, I will not go away. He's paid his debt or he's done his thing, and the slave owner says, you're free. Everything's taken care of. But the guy that was the slave says, I'm not going away because he loves you and your house. Since he prospers with you, then you shall take it all. That's one of those little pointed looking screwdrivers. It's not a screwdriver, it's just pointed. Has maybe a little wooden type thing on the end. Maybe it's just metal on the end. But it's made for punching holes in leather or wood or whatever. And kind of like an ice pick, if you could envision that. So you take it all and you thrust it through his ear to the door. And he shall be your servant forever. Also to your female servant you shall do likewise. And it shall not seem hard to you, for when you say you send him away free from you, for he has been worth a double hire servant in serving you this 6 years. And so the concept, and we have a song, matter of fact, that we sing that, Pierce my ear, O Lord. As you take the servant, kind of gruesome, and you back him up maybe to the side of the door, and you stretch his ear out there, and you punch a hole in it. Now, you've seen some unusual things that people wear nowadays, and they're stretching and doing. But this is just done all at once. And there's nothing more than to make a claim. I belong to you. I'm committed to you. So as Paul's writing this letter, he says, I am a bondservant, as he describes this in Romans chapter 1, of Jesus Christ. I made myself his because I love him that much. Why does Paul do the things he did? Because he's passionate for Jesus. He has committed himself so much, he's backed up to that door, imagery speaking, and said, punch the hole in my ear. I want to make a statement here. We belong to each other. You have cared for me. I'm part of this family, and I don't want to leave it. Now that's a drastic change for Paul, and yet that's exactly what he's done. He describes in the rest of this part of this verse as being called to be an apostle. Called. Now, if there was ever somebody that was called, I guess you could say be any of the apostles. Jesus went out and he called them to be apostles. And Paul got a special calling that's described in Acts chapter 9. And it was a different one. But nonetheless, it was a definite calling from God. I guess I have to stop and think, are we called? And how do we view ourselves? I hear preachers sometimes talking about being called to be a preacher. I don't think they got a special telephone call, nor with the modern technology it was an internet, email, or a text message, or whatever else they might come up with in the future. But there's something deep inside that says, I feel like I've got to do this. Well, Paul got more than that because there was a thing from heaven, but yet I feel like, as the Scriptures talk about, we're called to be Christians. Well, Paul knew he had a special calling to be an apostle that's described here. And the thing that's unique about this is the idea of what this thing apostle actually means. Because in the most parallel terms we have today, it's the word missionary. Apostle means one that's sent on a mission to go do something. Jesus called these people, and they were sent to go out into the world. And that exactly describes not just what missionaries are to be doing, but what we all are supposed to be doing. And that message mentioned in Matthew 28, where Jesus tells us to go out into all the world and preach the gospel, that's not just for the apostles, and then later to be passed on to whoever might really accept that challenge, but it's for the church, the entire church. Bondservants, called now. And then as you go back to the rest of what's being described here, it says that he's called to be an apostle, separated to the gospel from which he promised before through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures. Paul sees himself as an integral part of a tremendous plan that God set forth since the beginning of time. He refers it to the prophets of the Old Testament time. But the connection is, if you can envision, God's got this huge plan out here. And Paul says, I fit in here. I have a part in what's going on. So the reason you see that Paul now is involved in this is, number one, he sees himself as a bondservant. He recognizes he's called, but he sees this plan that God's given him, and he's described as being a part of that. It's something that's been going on way before his time and will continue on. We occasionally talk about Central and its history. Been here 103 years now. And so in this whole process of time, as we look at as who we are as a church, and been going on since eons of time, it seems like, way longer than any of us have been living, and we see ourselves maybe plugging into a part of that. But really it goes back a lot further than that, because who started that church goes back to whenever, and whoever had the idea to go to the gospel and start this with the Restoration movement, and whenever it began in different sectors and how it developed, is still part of that tremendous plan that God had always had in mind. And we're just lucky enough, blessed enough, to actually be a part of that. Called. And then the plan that's described that the prophets revealed, that's connected to verses 3 and 4 concerning his Son, Jesus Christ. Think about the plan that Jesus has, that he's been given to come to this earth. Our plan fits in that plan. Our purpose, our connection. That this plan doesn't just go with what happened 2,000 years ago and then just happens to kind of go here and there. But God has this great vision of the whole world actually belonging to him again. And Jesus came down to this earth. And he did this in such a way that the world was shaken up. Obviously so. Died on a cross, did it according to God's plan, resurrected, and goes into heaven, and then gives a gospel plan to the apostles. And now this thing is keeping on going on because of people who fit in this. So why did Paul do those things? Well, because he saw himself. I got to do this. I'm a part of this thing. And so he sees himself fitting in this whole thing, and the receiving the calling and the apostleship, and he says, This is what I have to do. And I'll describe that a little later on here. Look at verses 8, 9, and 10 here. He says, "First I thank my God through Jesus Christ for you all, that your faith is spoken of throughout the whole world. For God is my witness now," he says, "whom I serve with my spirit in the gospel of his Son, that without ceasing I make mention of you always in my prayers, and making request, if by some means now at last I may find my way in the will of God to come to you." Now Paul's longing to be with them. He's had this desire for some time. But I want you to notice something from another standpoint here. That he's making mention of these people in prayers. As if to say, my part is not the only part going on. I'm talking to God about this because God has a connection in what's going on. See, Paul's seeing what's happening here. And as he's seeing what's happening and what he's supposed to be doing, he also is very cognizant of the fact that God also has a part in this. Why does Paul go? Because he's not left behind. Because the words that Jesus spoke in Matthew 28, verses 19 and 20, when he says, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel." And then at the end of that, after he gives that commission, he says, and lo, I'm with you always. All the way to the end of the world. See, God's still involved in this. He's not left us alone and sent us out and says, "Good luck, guys. Make a good plan. Get together. Do some mission work. Plan, give, do." But the prayers tell me that Paul says, God's still involved in the hearts of people. In allowing us to connect at the right time with the right people. To share messages. And if we're not thinking that way, there's a lot of opportunities we can miss. God's involved. Stories, I'm sure that you could tell, and that I've heard of people that say, "Well, I'm here today as a Christian because," and they stop and think, "I'm not sure how it all happened. But I certainly wouldn't be here if it wasn't for God and His doing." I could say that. And many of you. And see, the fact is, God's still involved in this. So Paul's seeing his need in being called, his volunteerism to be a bondservant, but also he's seeing along with that God's still going on this thing. That we're not in this journey by ourselves. And Paul did it because of his commitment. Now look at Romans 10 for just a second here, verse 1. I want you to see something he mentioned here. What a passionate individual. And now all that's going on, Paul says, "Brethren, it's my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that you may be saved." Well, I know a lot of people that would say after they've been treated the way Paul's been, they wouldn't feel as open toward hoping that they'd be saved. "Well, good luck," they might say. "I hope somebody comes and talks to you, but the way you've treated me, I'm going to let somebody else do it." But that wasn't Paul's attitude. Paul's heart's desire for those people that kept on his trail persecuting him, stoning him, following him from one city to the next, as you read the book of Acts, his desire was that those people be saved. And as we're looking at all that's going on here, you see that he knows, as we're seeing this, that his efforts make a difference. That even though he's received persecution, he's dealt with the struggles, he's dealt with all the issues out there, he hasn't given up. Because what he's done has started some churches. What he has done has won some souls. And in that whole process of time, even though some of the churches may not have held faith, or some of the people in some of the churches, some of them have, and he's made a difference. And so Paul says, "This is my desire, and I'm going to stick with it, because I know there's a difference being made." It's such a good feeling to have somebody come back and talk to you sometime and say, I appreciate what you said. And they may name something 10 years ago or even further back than that. Because it really meant something to me. And you get this shocked look on your face and think, when did I say that? What did I do? And I'm sure you've gone through this. And you know people that have talked about it. And we don't think at the time that there's any difference really being made. And maybe the person walked away and you think, well, I'll never listen to that. And you've maybe given them some suggestions and some help. But you never know. So Paul says, I'm seeing there's a difference, and I'm going to stick with this. I like what he writes in Galatians chapter 5. As he's dealing with a church that really, well, he says at the beginning of the passage when he's talking about this letter here, he said, I'm amazed that so many of you are parting from the gospel. To another gospel which really isn't even a gospel. But it's a perverted version of it. But as he goes on talking about this, you think, boy, he's given up on that church. And then he says here toward the end of this letter in chapter 5, verse 9, and let us, now he's got them in the same boat as he is in, let us not grow weary while we're doing good. For in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. I'm making a difference. And you look around and you say, well, you know, Sunday night's not as crowded as it used to be. We're making a difference. There are people here on Sunday morning that maybe can't get back on Sunday night. Maybe some are tired, some are worn down, some of it's too dark, and a variety of different things. And maybe just some just don't want to come. But we're making a difference on Sunday night. We're making a difference on Sunday morning. And whoever you're talking to and the connection you have and the light that you shine, the things that you do, the examples that you lead, the words that you say, is making a difference. And the exhortation, you see, that's coming from God through the pen of Paul says, don't give up. Don't grow weary while you're doing good. Now, if you're doing bad, wear yourself out, quit that, stop it, and go on. But don't grow weary doing good. Keep at it. Now, who's telling us this? The Spirit that sees on the other side.